Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. Today, I want to talk to you about a budget crisis versus a cash flow crisis. Because so often I hear nonprofit leaders talk about budget crisis, but I rarely hear them distinguish between cash flow and a true budget crisis. So we're going to go over what is the difference between the two. And it's important to know which, because the actions we take are different depending on what's happening. So let's start with, what is a budget crisis? A budget crisis is when your overall revenue, your money coming in, is not enough to cover your money going out, meaning you're not bringing in a profit, you're not bringing in a net positive income, which I like to use in the nonprofit space, but I just like to use profit because it works just as well. It doesn't really matter as long as we're all clear on what the term is. So it means that over time, if you're having a budget crisis, you will run out of money. It means that you're spending too much compared to how much we're bringing in. I'll just jump ahead a little. How do we fix a budget crisis? Well, usually we need to invest in our activities to bring in more money. It's rarely the answer that we're just going to cut until our expenses match our revenue, unless we want to shrink until we go under, right? So a budget crisis is when, for a given amount of time, and that could be monthly, could be annually, I like to look at our budget revenue, profit and loss revenue scenario over what's called a rolling 12. So I'm always looking at the previous 12 months and saying, over the previous 12 months, did we bring in more money than we spent, right? A budget crisis should never really be an emergency if we have good cash flow. So what is a cash flow crisis or a cash crisis? So a cash flow crisis is when you don't have enough cash in the bank, money in the bank to pay your bills. You may have money coming in the future, right? Like maybe you received a grant that hasn't arrived yet. Maybe it's, you bring in a lot of money during your annual campaign and that hasn't come in yet. So big picture, you're going to have enough money to cover your expenses, but right now you have expenses that you don't have enough cash in the bank for. We can solve cash flow crises by dipping into, so if we have reserve funds, we don't really have a cash flow crisis because we can use our reserves to cover the cash flow. Especially if we don't have a budget crisis, but we do have a cash flow crisis, that's a great time to use our reserves. We can also borrow money to cover a cash flow crisis, again, if we don't also have a budget or a profit and loss crisis. All right, so a cash flow crisis is really about the money that's available to spend to invest in things or pay for expenses that we need to pay for now. Another great way to handle a cash flow crisis is simply to have a conversation with the people who you need to pay money to and find out where there's wiggle room. So often, if you're working with contractors, they are willing to be flexible in creating some sort of payment plan or receiving payment a little bit later, as long as they know the money is coming in and they're not going to have a hard time chasing you down. And if you reach out to them proactively instead of just not paying them and avoiding them, it makes a really, really big difference to come proactively and say, hey, this is going to happen. So let's also talk about a cash flow crisis should also not be a surprise because we are typically able, in most cases, it shouldn't be a surprise. Typically, we can monitor our cash flow, how much money is typically going out, how much we expect to go out in specific months where maybe we have bigger expenses, and exactly where and when our revenue, our cash is coming in. And then we can reasonably predict how much cash runway we have. So if we're continually watching our cash runway, I like to call it like the worst case scenario. If all new revenue stopped coming in, if all new cash stopped coming in, like when will we run out of money? And that we know is our runway. So if we can keep a 3 or 6 month runway in place, then we always have 3 or 6 months to solve a cash flow problem that we see coming in the future. So we have talked a little bit about what do we do in a budget crisis, or what I would like to call a revenue crisis, and what do we do in a cash flow crisis. And so I just want to take things just a step deeper than we have already. So if we have both a revenue crisis and a cash flow crisis, but we knew they were coming, then what we need to do is invest as much as we can in increasing our revenue generating expenses. Sounds counterintuitive, but we don't want to be cutting so much as increasing spending in revenue generating expenses. If we weren't watching and we are now surprised by a crisis or both of these crises, then what we need to do is reallocate funding or borrow funding, right? So we're going to take money away temporarily from our impact generating activities, programming and such. And we're going to move that money and that time and that people power into revenue generating expenses like staff to fund development funding. And I have to say, if we need a hero move to save us in a real crisis, and I have done this with clients, it is major donors, and especially reaching out to major donors sometimes to provide interest free loans, especially when we know that we're in a cash flow crisis, but not necessarily a revenue or budgetary crisis, right? So I want you to delete from your minds that we're going to be cutting when we're in a crisis. And I also want you to recognize that these things do not need to be a surprise, and therefore you should be able to fix them 9 times out of 10 before they happen. That being said, sometimes great major things happen in the world that put us in these situations, and they can take some time to get through. If you are interested in my ultimate nonprofit budget template, where I have a cash flow projection all set up, you can go to pivotground.com/budget dash template, and you can download. It's a pretty complex template, but it's a great place to get started. If you would like tips like these in your inbox, I give them through the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, which you can sign up for at inspirednonprofitleadership.com. If you would love to be having one-on-one guidance and individual support around dealing with a budget crisis, a cash flow crisis, or avoiding a budget or a cash flow crisis, that is what we do with clients who I work with individually. If it seems like we might be a good fit to work together, we can have a call to talk about the options. Until next time. All the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.